Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the Managing Director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. This video today we're going to be specifically talking about the K-3 supplemental marriage visa with respect to those spouses of United States citizens who are citizens of the Union of Myanmar. As previously noted, we're based here in Bangkok. However, we do deal with cases of nationals and processing through countries that are located here in the region. I've been known to myself go to Yangon and deal with these matters personally sometimes if necessary, or at least I should say assist the applicant in dealing with this kind of thing. Basically, when you're looking at the K-3, you sort of need to look at sort of three and a half phases of the process. So initially, one needs to go ahead and deal with what's called the Department of Homeland Security, the USCIS apparatus over in the United States, and a petition needs to be filed for an underlying immigrant visa. And then as soon as the filing for the underlying immigrant visa is perfected, one can go ahead and thereafter seek a supplemental K-3 or submit a supplemental K-3 petition in order to seek an expedited K-3 visa. The reason the K-3 was invented, it was invented under the provisions of what's called the Life Act. It was created under the Clinton administration. Basically at that time, INS, which was the precursor to USCIS under the auspices of the Department of Homeland Security, INS had such a backlog of immigrant spouse visa cases, including those spouses of American citizens, that I think Congress felt it was warranted to create this separate category. The reason for this is you had this very weird situation, I guess, where immigrant spouses of American citizens were processing far less slowly than fiancés of U.S. citizens for just sort of the way it was working out from a resource standpoint, a logistical standpoint within the immigration apparatus. Basically, the caseload was so high in the immigrant units that I just think that they did not have the ability to overcome that backlog. And basically, to their credit, USCIS revamped, restructured, allocated resources in such a way that in fact now immigrant spouse visas do move much more quickly than they once did. But at that time, before the Life Act was passed, we were talking multi-years to get a petition moved through on an alien spouse for a U.S. citizen, and you were talking about a few months in some cases for fiancés. So basically what they did is the fiancé category is a K-1. They created the K-3, which is another category within the K category, and they basically said, look, if you filed an immigrant spouse visa case, you can go ahead and make a supplemental filing for a K-3 visa, and this is only for spouses of U.S. citizens. You can go ahead and make a K-3 filing and go ahead and try to expedite processing of the underlying petition, and that's exactly what it ended up doing. Some years later, and some years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago now, I guess, maybe even a little more than that, the National Visa Center started instituting a policy of what's called administrative closure in cases involving K-3s. So what was basically happening is they had basically bridged the gap, the resources had been allocated, these cases were moving along quickly, and they basically were seeing cases in which the underlying immigrant case would make it to the National Visa Center prior to sometimes or simultaneously with the K-3 supplemental. And basically what they started doing is saying, look, the reasoning behind the K-3, which is to expedite it and get it to this point, is now gone. We're going to go ahead and administratively close the supplemental filing and go ahead and move forward strictly with the immigrant filing. And in immigrant visa matters involving spouses of U.S. citizens, you have to deal more thoroughly with the National Visa Center when compared to the K categories. And so basically what happened is National Visa Center started undertaking those and moving them on through. But when looking at a timeline for a case filed for the spouse who happens to be from Myanmar, I guess a Burmese spouse of a U.S. citizen, you're looking at sort of 3 phases. There's the initial petition with respect to K-3s, there's a supplemental petition, and then let's assume all goes to plan and the K-3 actually comes out first, makes it to NVC with some time to spare before the underlying immigrant case makes it. You'll file the underlying immigrant case, the K-3. The K-3 will get to the National Visa Center, and then they're going to go ahead and forward it over to the United States Embassy in Yangon or Rangoon, depending on how you sort of want to give it its moniker. And that case will start processing through that post over there. From that point, you got to deal with things like packet 3, packet 4, with respect to the actual consular processing, the adjudication of the actual visa application. The foreign spouse, in this case the spouse who's a citizen of Myanmar, is going to have to deal with things like producing various identity documentation, filling out various forms associated with the process, and going ahead and moving that visa application through the embassy. Assuming all goes according to plan and it's approved, usually within a few days of the interview, the visa will be issued and that individual would be able to travel to the United States fairly quickly thereafter. In some circumstances, what's called a 221G, a request for further documentation. There's another video on this channel that specifically pertains to 221G requests for documentation. In some cases, those will be issued and follow-on documentation will need to be issued in order for the case to proceed further and to seek approval of the underlying visa application. But that being said, those looking at K-3 visas from Myanmar should look at it as sort of a three-pronged process. Initially, one's dealing with Department of Homeland Security, then they're dealing technically with Department of State, but it's Department of State's National Visa Center in the United States. And then as soon as they've done their job and acted as a clearinghouse essentially, and moved the case over to the relevant embassy, in this case the United States Embassy in Yangon, Myanmar. As soon as that's moved over, you're going to go ahead and deal with the U.S. visa application and the consular processing thereof. And as soon as you see an approved visa application, you're going to go ahead and thereafter fairly quickly see an approved visa in that individual's passport. And fairly quickly thereafter that, you're going to be able to go ahead and see that individual travel to the United States and take up their residence with their American spouse.